ready?
Sure.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Little Things Podcast. I'm Bethany Werner. My friend Rachel Hines is not here today because she is homesick. So it's just me and an extra special guest visitor today who happens to also be the mother of my husband, Betsy Werner.
The other Mrs. Werner.
Yes, the other Mrs. Werner. And we are here to talk about a subject that is not little and not fun, but something that is a universal experience, that is grief. As we've been talking about the holidays and Christmas, and there's fun and joy and excitement and everything is special. And what I've learned in life is often that is accompanied by the sadness as well, especially when you've experienced loss. And so I thought, who better to talk to than my very wise and kind and faithful mother-in-law, Betsy Werner.
Thank you, Bethany. That was a bit much. But
Well, I
okay.
have to be very nice to her, too, because she gives me free childcare.
Yeah, that's worth a lot for both of us.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
So, Betsy, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay. I am married to David Werner, Michael's dad, and we had 4 children over the years. And David was a Lutheran high school teacher for pretty much most of his career, and I did some classroom teaching, but for most of my career, well, actually about 40 years, I was a music teacher, and for 25 years of that, I was also the director of music at our congregation. So that's kind of my background that way. We had 2 kids not right away, but soon after marriage, John and Ruth. They're about two years apart. And then 8 years later, we had 2 more. They were Jessica and Michael. And they grew up, they went to the school where I taught them music, and then they went to the high school where David was their religion and sometimes math teacher and basketball and track coach, all that. So that was sort of our family life. The reason you, Bethany, asked me to be on this, because besides my wisdom and kindness and everything else, is that a few decades ago, on the first day of 10th grade, our daughter Ruth died in a car crash on the way to school. And she pretty much died right away that morning. John was already at school, so was because he had probably early morning jazz band or something like that. And Jessica was in the back seat of the car. David was the passenger. Ruth was driving with her permit, but she had already been driving for 7 or 8 months. So she knew what she was doing, and anyway. But that's when it happened. David was severely injured, 11 rib fractures, and Jessica was pretty banged up and had a concussion and stuff like that. But Ruth died within hours, or at least officially pronounced dead, though she was, by God's grace, she was quickly taken to heaven and maybe did not feel that much pain. So our family got to experience much of what a lot of other families feel, whether it's a loss of a child or another family member, and learning how to cope with that. One of the things that had happened several years before we even had kids, when we lived in Chicago, that, by the way, where we lived most of our career with the kids was in Minnesota. But when we were in Chicago, I remember going to a 3-week adult Bible class by the 2 people who were the founders and ran I hope I get the name right, the organization called Compassionate Friends, which was founded to help people who had lost a child.
And you just went to that?
And we just went to that as we were just congregation members, and it was offered, and we learned a lot about stages of grief, like Elizabeth Kubler-Ross stuff, and other statistical things. Two of the things that really stuck in my head from that, which actually was a boon to me later on, one of the things was that when a child dies, the divorce rate between husband and wife skyrockets. I don't know what the current statistics are on that, but because the mother and the father each have a different relationship with that child, and they'd have different personalities anyway, and as we all know, marriage is a blessing, but it can also be a challenge, and so that could be a problem. Okay. And then the other thing is the whole thing of how long grief lasts. And one of the little phrases I remember was that expect hard grief to last 2 to 5 years. And at the end of that hard grief time, you're still grieving. It's just not the hard, horrible stuff. So I just happened to have learned that, many years before, and then probably 15 years later is when this happened to me. So that was good for me to have heard, because one of the first things we did when we were dealing with, I was the only healthy one in a way.
Physically healthy.
Physically healthy,
Yeah.
not emotionally healthy, but I had to do a lot of the tending of the family because David was out of it because of all of his injuries. Anyway, but we got marriage counseling right away, and that helped. I think, I don't know. It's such a horrible thing. It's hard to say what was the level of help, but maybe maybe it could have been worse.
Right.
So,
What I have learned too, what I heard in I was reading about grief, or Michael and I experienced grief in a different way, not in a loss of a loved one, but through years of infertility, just holding on to a kind of a grief of a loss of expectation or loss of identity. And two people, you do not grieve together. Everyone grieves alone. So when you have a married couple and they're both grieving, you have to do it yourself. You have to go through it yourself. And you can hopefully turn towards each other and help each other, but also it's not natural. Like you have to work at it. When we were going through stuff, we also went through marriage counseling, and we tried to talk a lot to make sure we were leaning into each other and not away from each other, because grief is you just want to turn in on yourself and
roll up in that kind of fetal position and shut out the world. As a mom with little kids, because Michael was only 5 years old and Jessica was 7, I had to tend to them. John was a senior in high school, and he dealt with it as just getting himself over-involved in things. So every morning was going to jazz band or swing choir practice and staying after school for sports.
And just keep moving, and you don't have to think about it. And we're recording this in the time when every single person is sick, so Betsy might have to cough a little bit too.
Brought cough drops.
We're all doing the best we can.
Oh.
But yeah, that's a coping mechanism of I'm just going to keep going, and then I won't let my brain think about it.
That was John's reaction was kind of hard on Michael. and
Oh,
Jessica.
yeah, because he was absent.
He just, Ruth, of course, was gone. Dad was, well, I hate to say, he was doped up on pain medications.
Yeah.
So that's reality. And so that was where I had to keep going, even though I maybe was dealing with it in maybe even unhealthy ways. But, yeah. Anyway, but the blessing of all that is that somehow it's a miracle God brought us through it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking of that too, though, like when you were talking about the grief of infertility, and this podcast is supposed to be grief, dealing with grief during the holidays and other special things, not just Christmas, but it's sometimes watching other people celebrate big deals. Like, for you, Mother's Day, I know, had been very hard. And
Yeah, we just did not. I didn't go to church on Mother's Day for probably 7 years.
yeah,
And we'd go to church every Sunday. That's not something
Yeah,
that
I
is
know.
ever an option for us. But it was like, I just can't do that, and I couldn't do it,
yeah.
which broke my heart for my mother and you. Like, I'm sure we weren't, I don't know if I ever got you a Mother's Day card.
Oh, that's okay. I'm not a gift
She's
giver,
not,
sorry.
yes, she doesn't really care. But that was definitely I'm doing the best I can to do this day.
Yeah.
And so I'm sure there's different days for everyone, whether it be a loved one's birthday or Christmas, really any of those big holidays. And we were thinking grief is definitely loss of a loved one, but sometimes it is a loss of an expectation like infertility, or maybe singleness and you have such a desire to be married, but it hasn't happened yet. Or maybe you've gone through a divorce and it's those holidays, those big things that just put a spotlight on what's not there or what should or could be, and I think we all have something that we carry around.
And as I was saying before about the super intense grief is the first few years. And, when you said grief in the holidays, and I was thinking, first, when it's fresh grief, it's like, okay, it's her birthday, so it's Christmas. Every day is horrible.
Yeah.
That sounds, okay.
But you're almost numb in a way.
But even after that, after like this, it's been many years, and she is not my constant thought anymore. But then there are times when, as the years passed, when her good friends were getting married, and I had to play the organ at their weddings.
Yes.
Or they were having babies, or I have another friend whose husband had died, and then their good friends would be celebrating landmark anniversaries. And even though this friend had acclimated herself to being alone,
It's still
very hard. Yeah. So there's sort of waves that keep on coming.
That is what I said. There's always those happy, joy, wonderful things. There's always a twinge of sadness. There can be, especially with grief. Like going through infertility, every time my friend or sibling or someone had a baby announcement. And I remember telling my friend, Lindsay, of like, just text me so I can respond appropriately. Because obviously I'm happy and it's wonderful and I want this so much for you. And I'm sad. Like, it's just, I don't even like that about myself. I know that's not how I want to feel, but that's what happens. And just being sensitive of giving each other grace.
Yeah.
To have whatever emotional response is going to come.
Because you really don't know. When somebody is being a real crab or difficult to work with or live with, you have to step back and go, okay, I don't know what is really going on in their life, in their mind. And again, give them grace. Look at them with pity and compassion. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you don't know. Yeah.
I was just talking to my friend Shannon, who lost her dad, and this is the third Christmas without her dad. And she was like, in a way, we knew the first Christmas was going to be terrible. And then the second Christmas, she had another relative that was sick. So it kind of, they could put their energy towards that, She's like, and now this Christmas is so hard. But you don't expect it, maybe, to be as hard as it's feeling.
Yeah. And those emotions come in waves. Yeah, everything's hunky-dory, and then something happens. Since I was a church musician, I lived hymns and liturgy and all that kind of stuff, and taught it to kids in my choirs and all that kind of stuff, and really didn't realize how many hymns, whether it's traditional hymnody or contemporary, how many of them deal with the goal of being in heaven with Jesus and the joy. But singing those hymns, I don't always cry, but I often still do. And
I know. I think of that because one of our songs that we sing a lot is I Am Jesus' Little Lamb. And that last verse is all about dying. And it's kind of having that realization of this is just a cute little lullaby song that we sing before bed. But really every day we sing about we're going to die. And then Jesus is going to fold us to his breast, safe within his arms to rest.
It's like that old children's bedtime prayer. Now I lay me down to sleep. If I should die before I wake. But I pray thee, Lord, my soul to take. And just knowing that is a surety. And, for me to live as Jesus, to die as gain, that might be fine for me to say about myself. But it's wholly, completely different when it's about somebody else.
Yeah.
So, anyway, that's...
So when you can think of your life now and years and years ago, when there were some of those, what were some of the big events? Well, I guess you already said like those weddings and all of those. Was there something that did help you go through a big celebration or a holiday or something?
A lot of it was friends who had also grieved in some way through a death of a spouse or a death of a child. Because after, we kind of had this, we talked about kind of being members of this club. We didn't want to be, but, like a widow can understand other widows, even though the relationships were different and the grief is different, but at least there's somebody who kind of gets it. And, the night, actually, Ruth's best friend died 3 years later in a car crash on the way to school.
Oh, my goodness.
And on February 13th. It was Ash Wednesday, actually. And that night, I had choir practice Wednesday evening, and I got a phone call. Somebody took the phone call at church, and it was this girl's mom and asking if I could come over. And so I did. Yeah, because, you get it. I'd rather have read a book about it, but, Yeah. And so,
I would even say, I know when we had, when I had my worst day ever, and it, we had something and it was taken away from us and we were absolutely heartbroken. And I remember driving in my car thinking, this is my worst day and no one knows about it, And then I just instinctively wanted to surround myself with people who I knew survived things. I was like, this woman, I know she lost her sister and she's heartbroken about it. And she lived that, and she's strong and she's survived it. I need to be around her.
Mm-hmm.
I need to be around people that are survivors, which, because we can't do it by ourselves,
Right.
at all.
Right. Yeah, and I guess not exactly onto that with that of through the years. You were saying what helped. Okay, being with other people. Sometimes just the hugs and the I'm so sorry's, and don't try to. It doesn't help if someone who's grieving, and then you try to assuage their grief by some platitude that makes it worse.
Like everything happens for a reason,
or God must have wanted this to happen, or
she's an angel now.
Yeah.
Oh, that's the worst.
Yeah, and so sometimes just being there, and so many people would say, and this is, I get it, because I might have said the same thing of, call me if you need any help.
Right.
Well, the person is barely keeping their head above water. Mm-hmm. They're probably not going to call you.
I can't get out of bed. How am I supposed to call you?
Yeah. And so sometimes just taking the action and doing something, whether it's writing a card or bringing over a plate of, I would say cookies, but maybe something healthy.
Oh, Betsy, she's all.
No, but don't wait for that injured person to reach out to you.
Because they don't even know what they need. Yeah. And I think, like we both said, being around other people is so important, but you do not want to be around people. I mean, it's a lot easier to stay in your house away and hide and avoid, but that's not necessarily what's going to help.
Yeah. Getting out, I had already found strength in God's Word, and the strengthening that comes from the fellowship of other believers, so at church or Bible studies or choirs or whatever, and being in community is very helpful. And there are some people who don't know how to deal with it. Some of my good friends might think, if they avoid the subject, that's the best thing, or if I start tearing up, oh, I'm so sorry, I reminded you. It's like, you did not remind me.
It's not like you forgot.
Yeah.
It's something you're carrying all the time. Do you think it's helpful for people to, especially when you were around people that knew Ruth and loved Ruth, for them to bring her up and to celebrate her as well? And it's not like a bad secret.
Even back then.
Yeah.
The person who is freshly grieving, that is on their minds all the time, just every waking moment. It's always there. So, so they can say something about it. But, you have to be sensitive to how the other person might be reacting to that. And it's okay if they cry. If they start crying in front of you, that means they trust you. It could, probably. And I've had other friends who were at a job or something like that, and how are you doing? And I can't talk right now. I have to get this work done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think working at a church, and a lot of people knew what we were going through, or and sometimes people would just come up to my desk and I am like, okay, I love it and I appreciate that. And I cannot just I can't be working in a healthy headspace 1 minute and then, have to talk about the worst thing in the whole world and then go back to this. So that was the thing too. Also, working in a church, I'm a big church crier. And that's sometimes a hard thing too.
Oh, during a
Yeah.
regularly, yeah. Yeah, I always have Kleenex in my pocket. And I think that's okay.
And I think it's the best place to cry.
Yes, it is. And it's actually okay if other people see you doing that. Because then they might go, oh, this is okay for me to bear my feelings too, instead of everything's wonderful. Jesus loves me and life is one, which is true. Jesus loves me, and the important things really are taken care of.
Yeah.
Through Jesus' life, death, and resurrection, salvation is secured for me, for my kids, for all of that. But
And
yeah.
this stinks.
Yeah, and this stinks at the same time.
Okay, tell the story at Ruth's funeral and Mark Meshke.
Oh, but I can't say that word, can I?
I don't know.
Oh.
We'll bleep it out. We're going to swear.
It was really awful. Okay, so her funeral was on a Sunday. Normally funerals aren't, but it was. David was still in this specialty hospital in downtown Minneapolis. By God's grace and just the way things worked out, we had some friends who had a physically a young boy, or he was older by then, teenage-ish, who needed a wheelchair. And so they had a handicap-accessible van. And somebody went to the local VFW and got a wheelchair, and these two people, Ann and Dan, went to the hospital and got David out early Sunday morning so that he could come. Well, it wasn't that early because so that he could get to the funeral. But the night before, as in many places, there's this visitation at the funeral home. She died on September 1, and so the night before, end of August, even in Minnesota, the weather actually was quite pleasant. It wasn't rainy, all that kind of stuff, or cold. And when a young person dies, whether it's a child, a high schooler, or even a young adult who is active in the community, a lot of people come to the funeral. We had to set up extra chairs in the church and that kind of stuff. But the funeral home was just packed, and I stood for hours and hours giving hugs to dozens of her high school friends, because Ruth cut a wide swath. She had lots of friends. She was on sports teams and music groups and youth groups and all that kind of stuff. And so I had to be hugging, and they would be crying, and I would pat them, and I was kind of like, I guess I'm supposed to comfort you. So I would do it kind of became this sort of, they were sobbing, I was hugging, and they gave and I would do a token. It sounds calloused right now. A token sob or two, because it was there, but I was trying to survive the evening. And my brother-in-law, Mark Meshke, so he's in heaven now, so you can't say about what. He was also a pastor. He had been many years a teacher at that local Lutheran high school in Mayer, Minnesota, and then had been teaching in the St. Louis area, and then became a pastor. So and I just, this had been going on for hours, and Mark and his wife Dottie were right behind me. David was still in the hospital, and I was doing this. So there was a tiny break in the crowd, like a couple, maybe 30 seconds or something. And I just turned around, and here's the word you might have to bleep out. I said to him, I just want to say shit. But I know I shouldn't. He said, Betsy, you're not taking God's name in vain. And there are some situations in life that maybe deserve that kind of a word. So there was my bleep.
Yep.
And
I think that is
yeah.
so, you are this lovely, professional church worker who, sometimes that's the only word to use. And the pastor affirming it, pastor brother-in-law affirming it.
Yeah.
But also, like, that is this side of heaven, is that pain and that, who would ever ask a grieving mother to do that? Which, wonderful that you were able to and understand those poor, sweet friends that lost Ruth. But also, what?
Yeah. Ugh. It was that whole evening. I still remember it many years later.
Yeah.
But it was good for me just to see the love in the community, not just among her friends, but our friends, the friends of friends, because we were very much involved in the community. And different churches involved, not just our own, but since the high school was part of this greater Minnesota South District thing. That was really good to see. Not everybody gets that
kind of support.
Yeah. And we were really blessed that way.
I think it's also, just important to remember that grieving is not going to be, graceful or beautiful or, I know, like, I grew up in the church and my dad's a pastor and I was a theology major at Concordia, and on paper I know a lot of the right answers. And when we were going through infertility and knee deep in it and I was just felt like I was drowning, I know God loves me, and I did not feel like God loves me. And I know that God isn't withholding something from me, or he's not ignoring my prayers, or he's not vengeful, but that's how I felt. And I did want to play this game of, well, if I just learn this lesson, or if I just pray hard enough, or, what am I doing wrong? And that's not true.
Yeah. Though there is a little bit, as I've, really studied Bible history, studied the Old Testament, and all the ways that God sometimes used in the Bible to teach a lesson. Not that you want to go, okay, what's God teaching me? But looking back many years later, there were some good things that happened. Whether it brought our family closer together, maybe. Or maybe if other kids had a wake-up call, maybe. I don't know.
Well, and what if we think of, okay, God works for the good of all those that love him according to his will. And what is God's will is for us to be in heaven. And that we have to trust ultimately that what is happening is for a heavenly reason. Even if it stinks on earth. And we may never understand it.
Ruth died on a Thursday morning. The previous Sunday, we had had communion, and we had been up at the communion rail together. And there's sort of a little corner at that church where kind of you fold around. I mean, the people kind of are in a folded around line. And so I'm there, and then a couple down from me was Ruth. And then, so she took Jesus' body and blood, again, the assurance of salvation. And now, whenever we do a full communion liturgy, you say, the pastor starts, and then we sing after that of, therefore with angels and archangels and all the company of heaven. That was a tearjerker right there. Yeah, but knowing that, okay, I'm singing holy, holy, holy down here, And Ruth is praising God too. I know that.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd rather she were here. But okay. Yeah.
But yeah, and then to think, like, our life is just such a small little blimp in eternity where we will be praising God forever.
Yeah. So, yeah. One thing I had thought of earlier, because you asked me to do this, and I was thinking, okay, I don't have any sage words of wisdom.
That's not true.
Okay. But I do remember we got a lot of sympathy cards, and I was just going to say this, that the handwritten notes meant so much. I mean, it was lovely, a lovely thing to get a store-bought sympathy card, but if it was just signed by Jim and Jane Smith, whatever, that was wonderful. That was kind. But if they had bothered to write something out, and especially if they had written out some Bible verses, because really, for at least a month or 2 months, my only prayer, most of my prayer time was sobbing.
Yeah.
And I would start praying and I would just bawl, you know. But reading those cards, those handwritten messages. So that's a little tiny thing that people maybe don't realize how important that is. And maybe in other situations too. I haven't struggled with the same thing that other people have. So
I know one part, I was in a Bible study with this group of women for years as I was going through the infertility. And this other woman in the study, she had a long unanswered prayer request, and I had this. And we both had been just feeling like, I can't pray anymore about this. I can't do it. And we both committed to, I'm going to pray for you. I'm only going to be praying for your prayer request. And she committed to praying for mine. And I found, so much joy and comfort in praying for her. When I was feeling my grief, of praying for her was a lot easier than praying for me. But then knowing that God was working through both those.
yeah, because that's a good idea. Just it forces you, or it encourages you to get your mind off of yourself. Which is, I'm a very self-centered person anyway. That's what humans are. We like to pay attention to me and what's in this for me, or my hurts and my feelings. And but if you have some kind of a discipline like that, or an agreement that makes you get your mind off yourself and your grief, even momentarily, just to go, okay, I'm not the only one, or other people are also hurting, or it could, yeah.
And I'm not alone in this.
Yeah,
Other people are praying for me as well. Yeah. What are the things, we've kind of already touched on this, but not to do if you have a loved one that is grieving, and I don't know what I'm supposed to say or what I'm supposed to do. We've touched a little bit about this, but what are some ideas?
Besides the things not to say, which are things like, God must have had a plan, or God must have known she was going to get in trouble, and so he took her before.
Oh my goodness.
No.
Yeah.
Or other people. This didn't happen to me, but I have heard of people who will. They are still just a year or two out, and someone else in their workplace or another acquaintance of, are you still grieving? You need to get. It's time for you to get over this.
Get over it.
Yeah, or maybe you need some extra, whatever, therapy or something. It's been 2 years.
Oh my goodness.
No.
No.
So just kind of being careful about that. And when people say stuff like that, you somehow have to let it roll off your back.
Yeah. Yeah.
What not to say. And then the other thing is to continue involving people yeah, and I don't know everybody in town. Obviously, I don't know everybody in my church and things like that. But just trying to be aware of who it might be, and just do that. It doesn't have to be a great big, bear hug. It can just be a hand on a shoulder, and just say, or even say, "How you doing?" And try to do it in a way they might think you mean it. One of the things that has bugged me, especially since then, is why the kind of the standard greeting of, "Hi, how are you?"
Oh, fine.
Yeah, and
Good.
even passing somebody on a sidewalk, and you don't know who they are, and they say, "Hi, how are you?" And they keep walking, and it's like, "Why'd you ask me that?" And they really don't. So don't say that unless you are ready to listen.
Yeah.
And after a while, I kind of learned who I could tell how I really was doing. And then I just said, if I said I'm okay, I'm doing okay, that probably meant I was really hurting and in trouble. And a lot of my good friends, if in public, if they would say, "How are you doing?" And I said, "I'm okay," they'd go, "Let's talk about that," because that had to be my go-to.
Yep.
But a lot of people really, I think people are scared of listening to the grieving, of, whether it's me talking about, loss of a child, you talking about, I want to have a baby. And if other people are,
It's uncomfortable.
it's very uncomfortable. And at least be there and say, "I don't know what you're going through. Really don't know, but I'm
It's
so
also-
sorry," or
yeah,
something. Yeah.
Or this stinks.
Yeah.
There's when I think it's a good point to make that when you don't have to feel like you have to be honest with every person of how are you doing. You can say I'm good because
that's
I
what I
do
say.
not want to.
I just say, "I'm okay."
I'm okay.
Yeah.
And that's fine. But then having those trusted, I know my friend Catherine here at Messiah. I have a lot of wonderful people, but for some reason, I have sobbed on her shoulder twice. I've sobbed on your shoulder. I know at least once where, I can't do that with everybody.
Yeah.
And most people don't want me to do that, which is fair.
Yeah.
But I know some people I can, and they're going to love me anyways. And what a blessing to have those people. And,
And sometimes also many months later, somebody would actually apologize to me for not reaching out because what had happened to us really rustled up some fears that they had. And maybe a memory of a loss, or what's going to happen to my kids, that kind of thing.
yeah.
So they didn't know how to deal with that because of their own natural anxieties or
Right.
built up anxieties. And it could be with a whole lot of things of whether it's a loss of a loved one, loss of a job, loss of a marriage, or just some kind of a
An
loss
expectation.
and hurt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as we are moving into the holidays, just to remember to give ourselves grace for whatever we might be feeling or thinking, and knowing in all the joy and the happiness, there is still that little bit of heartbreak that comes along, which we also see in the Christmas story, where you have Mary and Joseph have this little baby Jesus who is God and perfect, and he is going to die.
Yeah.
And he is going to
they're
take the
told that
sin of
right
the
up
world.
front.
Yeah.
Told that right away. Yeah.
And that's what Christmas is all about.
Yeah. I have a friend who, again, had I use past tense, loved Christmas, and she was one of the people who, overboard with decorations and holly jolly stuff. And then her son died, and she said, I still love Christmas, and because it really is all about the hope that God loved us so much that he sent this little baby and who grew up to be our Savior. And just listening to her talk, and it's still hard. It's still hard. She still cries at church and sometimes feels uncomfortable going at all. But that's just knowing that was part of God's plan. That was part of God's plan.
Yeah,
not
and
just to send Jesus, but also to save me, to save you, to save Ruth, and we don't understand all of it, but
no, but none of it surprises God. None of it is off his radar of, oh, whoops, this was, he is present through all of it and in all of it. And so it's also just time to give ourselves grace and to give each other grace.
Yeah, and be sensitive to how other people might be feeling. Whether there's been a public loss, it might not even be a recent loss.
Yeah.
Just be sensitive, or people who they don't have someone to celebrate holidays with. Invite
Be
them
open.
over.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for coming, Betsy, and sharing with us. I appreciate it, and it's just, it's a real life. It's real life stuff. So, thank you.
You're welcome, and I was glad to be here. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
This has been a Messiah Lutheran Ministry production. Subscribe to Messiah Lutheran on Apple Podcasts or anywhere you listen to podcasts. You can also find our worship services and our Sermon Extra podcast by searching Messiah Lincoln on YouTube. Make sure you like and subscribe so you don't miss out on any of our content. If you'd like to know more about Messiah Ministries, visit messiah.us. We'd love to hear from you as well, so please email us at littlethings@messiah.us.